Today, we are releasing our fourth and final episode of the series with myself and Micah Murdoch. And we are integrating all of the tools that we've talked about in our previous three episodes and combining them into how to make the shift from a default paradigm or things, habits, patterns, behaviors that you don't love, and how to gently and carefully shift them into more intentional living. So, thanks for being here. Welcome to Burnout Solutions, a podcast designed to help high achievers and healthcare professionals understand stress and how it can lead to burnout. Together, we'll explore how your brain and nervous system naturally work and why they sometimes hold you back, and how to overcome those challenges to fully enjoy the success you've worked so hard to create. I am your host, Mona Tippett, registered nurse, burnout coach, and resiliency educator. Hello, and welcome back to Burnout Solutions. Today, I'm super excited to be finishing up this series with Micah Murdoch. We are talking about the paradigm today and how to shift our paradigm. We have given you a lot of tools in the last three episodes to help you understand just how to process your emotions and your stress. And today we are going to combine it all together and how to help you go from just our default, our reactions, and go into creating a life of intention and purpose. So welcome back, Micah.
Thanks, Mona. It's good to be here. I'm excited about this topic. This is, like you said, the culmination of all the other conversations that we've had. This is a tool that I have a lot of experience using, and I really have come to feel like this is really the crux, right? This is kind of the backbone of a lot of the things that we do. And I'm excited to talk about it because it's had such a huge impact on my life and helping make my responses to my circumstances healthier and more full of joy. And it's just been great. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, awesome. And the same for me. I've often in the past have thought, okay, I want to change. I want to be a different person. I have made goals, or I tell myself, okay, I'm not going to do that behavior anymore. And this has really helped me change those repeating patterns and help me make the shift to be more intentional and be more purposeful in what I do. And if you are a human being, you may have similar struggles. And this is because our brains are wired to run on default. Our brains want to be most efficient as possible. And so they often create thinking patterns and behavior patterns. And it's almost like a mathematical equation: when X plus Y happens, then Z is a result. So today, I just love how this is a framework that can help break that down, can help slow things down, can help widen that space in between the stimulus of something happening and our response to that. So, yeah, we're just both really excited to talk about this framework to successfully live a more intentional life with less stress. This is called the feasible paradigm, FSEBEL. Feasible is how we say it in life coach school. And we are going to explain it to you so that you can implement this immediately. And that's what I love, is that it does take practice, but once you start to practice it and see situations in life, and the beauty of life is you can have situations daily, minute by minute, to implement this. And this helps us understand our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors that maybe create those thinking patterns and behavior patterns in our life. And we're going to teach you today how to shift them. So, Micah, do you want to just talk about the
Yeah, sure.
steps
Happy
of the
to jump in
paradigm?
and do that. Uh, as we're talking about this paradigm and the shifting of the paradigm, just to kind of build on something you just said, Mona, I feel like a lot of the efforts I've made over my lifetime to change my behaviors have been largely focused on changing my behaviors. And there's lots of stuff out there like
Yeah.
Atomic Habits and Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And others that are widely understood, and I've read those and I love them, and I think they all are have their place and are really important to understand the principles that are taught in those books. The thing that I always felt was missing that this sort of fills in the gap for is it doesn't rely strictly on me just having stronger willpower or me just
Mm,
changing
mm.
the environment around me to like implementing new systems and all these kinds of things, which again are really important. I don't mean to dismiss those, but being able to change thinking patterns is such a powerful way. It's a powerful tool to add to that, your quiver of ideas that you have to be able to improve your life in a really fundamental way. And the paradigm really gets to that. It's this idea of we think a certain way, sometimes by default, and we can have impact on that and change and think in a more deliberate way. And it's not in order to align ourselves to society or to our parents or to our spouse or to our children. It's to align ourselves more fully with our own values. So that's kind of an important piece. We're not going to talk a ton about
Yeah.
finding your values and all that kind of thing. I think that's one thing that the rest of the world does really well. Like, who are you? What do you want? What are your values? What are you really trying to get to? But once you've been able to establish, like, this is the kind of person I want to be, then this tool set of using the paradigm helps you get closer in the way you think to align to those values in a way that's really important. So I just wanted to kind of lay that foundation before we talk about the nuts and bolts of the paradigm as a way of kind of just helping understand that.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you for doing that.
All right, so getting into the paradigm itself. So you spelled it out, FSEBEL, the feasible paradigm, and each of those is stands for a word. So F is facts, and we've talked already about facts versus story, which is the S. So F is facts, S is story. Facts are these neutral details, these environmental factors or things that are kind of around us or that are happening often to us. It's things like numbers, dates, words that we say or that others say to us, events. These are all just things that like are incontrovertible. Everyone would kind of agree that that's exactly what happened, or that's what was said, and or those are the numbers, those are the dates. These are the facts, right? The things that you could maybe one way to think of it. Sometimes we talk about it's something you could prove in a court of law, right? Like it's just something that isn't in and of
Mhm,
itself
mhm.
good or bad. It's just the thing that exists in our life. The story and our
Yeah.
whole podcast last time was talking about facts versus story. And the reason we say facts versus story is because oftentimes we think our story is the facts and we get those two confused. But the story is the meaning that you give to the facts of your life. So somebody says something to you, the words themselves are the facts. The meaning that we think they give, that we give to them is that's the story. For instance, if somebody spoke to you in a foreign language
Yeah.
that you didn't understand, they would still be using words, but they would have zero impact on us because we cannot assign meaning to those words because we don't understand the words that they're using, right? So that's kind of a way of understanding how
Yeah.
showing evidence that the words themselves really have no impact whatsoever until we can assign meaning to them, and that's the story part of it, right?
Right. And also, I just want to add when you read a fact or experience something, and I experience the same thing, they don't always mean
Right.
the same thing to each of us. It's very individual. It's very much our perspective from our past and my own experiences versus your own experiences, which is why both of us can read the same email and have very different stories about it, or something could be implemented in the city or a law could change or something, and it affects us totally differently because of our
Yeah.
story. So it's our
That's right.
past.
Our past experiences are a huge contributor to the stories that we're coming up with. And so if you'd like to learn a little bit more about facts versus story, look at our previous podcast because we talked about that like through the whole thing. That was the whole topic of it.
Yes.
Maybe one other
Yes.
brief example of what you just said, Mona, though, is maybe when we've said something to our child and our child comes back and says, "Gosh, Dad, you're being really hard on me right now." One dad might hear that and think, "Oh, good. Like being hard on my kids is that's aligned with my values. Like I want to be hard on my kids. I want them to be tough and like blah blah blah." Like, or another dad might say, "Oh my gosh, I'm being too hard on you. I should change. I should be different." Like we can assign all kinds of meaning, and when we say meaning, we don't mean like meaning of the words themselves, like
Mhm.
literal dictionary meanings. Like that's something that most of us can kind of agree on. But even that's a little bit different. But it's the way that the meaning of those words impact us, and the stories that we tell ourselves about what that means to us. So that's facts versus story. We spent a little extra time on that
Right.
because that's really the story is the hinge that the whole paradigm swings on. It's a kind of a small thing, and it can be a
Yes.
small thing, sometimes even an automatic thing, and we'll talk about that more. But everything after that kind of cascades down from the story. So this understanding the story is so important, and being able to understand how we could shift our
Hmm.
stories is really the most powerful element of the paradigm. But from our stories comes the next letter, which is E, and that's our emotions. So it's the way that we feel, the feelings that arise, right? So we have this meaning that comes from our facts, we assign it meaning, and then that creates emotional responses. We feel anxiety or embarrassed or
Right.
happy or joyful or satisfied or whatever. That's so the emotion comes from that story. And that emotion dictates in a large manner our behavior. So our behavior is a representation of the way that we're feeling. And that behavior then creates immediate effect. So we behave in a certain way. Maybe we hug someone, or we yell at someone, or we walk away, or we stonewall, or we dig in, and whatever behavior we have that creates an immediate effect. And then over time, that short-term effect accumulates into a long-term legacy. So that's the B, the E, and the L is the behavior, the effect, and the legacy. So that's just a quick overview of the what the feasible paradigm is. And so we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about how to utilize this, what it looks like in real life, and giving like examples and stuff like that.
Yeah. Awesome. And let's just start like with an easy example.
Yeah.
Parenting. We both have great experience in parenting. I think any parent who has kids for longer than a day can can experience different stories. So I think about this quite often with I have teenagers. I have my kids are all let's see 12 to 18 and I have 4 kids. And we get facial expressions like the side eye, or say that your teenager rolls their eyes or gives you the side eye or gives you the stink face, right? So that is the fact. Now, my brain tells a story. And usually my default reaction is, oh, my kids don't respect me. They're being flippant. They're not being kind. They're not listening. I have all this brain chatter behind what the eye roll means. And so that story creates an emotion, and it's usually anger or frustration, or I feel disrespected. And then when I feel anger, disrespect, or frustration, traditionally I go into a yelling or a lecture or, hey, don't look at me that way. Don't give me that face. I'm trying to help you. I need you to stay here. And I continue to lecture, not only about what I was talking about before, but now I've layered on the, and don't look at me that way. So, shockingly or not shockingly, the effect is there comes a power struggle between my child and I, and like a disrespect struggle. And were they being disrespectful? Were they not? And then this often becomes a repeated cycle. And the compound effect or the legacy of that is I have a strained relationship. I'm not communicating well with my child. Maybe my child feels unheard. They feel like all you do is lecture me or yell at me, or I just get in trouble when, I'm just being a teenager. And sometimes, actually, my husband's much better at this than I am. But when he sees that, and I am getting better. I am getting better. Which is the beauty of all of this, is that it has helped me see where I can change. So when he sees that I roll, he's like, oh, well, they're just tired. They're hungry. They are not wanting to be lectured again. They're tired of hearing me yak at them. They understand, they already know they need to pick up their backpack and do their homework and all of this stuff, and they don't like being reminded. So that's where the eye roll is coming from. And he actually has more empathy and more compassion instead of the anger, instead of the frustration or the stress that I do. And then he just says, hey, okay, just take care of it. I know you know what to do. And that creates an effect of, I understand you. I'm not going to lecture you. We can communicate. Maybe next time, be a little bit more respectful, but it doesn't turn into a power struggle or a lecture or a strained relationship. It's just, hey, like, let's take care of this and then let's move on.
That's great. I love that. Let me just throw one other out. There's another scenario talking. We often are talking about nurses and teachers in our discussions as well. You've given a good example of parenting. If I'm a teacher and I've maybe just been notified that there's like going to be budget cuts or something, like we're going to have fewer funds at the school than we had in the past, and it's having a direct impact
Mm-hmm.
on my ability to get supplies I need for my class or something like that. That might be the fact, right? Like budgets are cut and supplies are going to be impacted, or my ability to gain or to accumulate the appropriate supplies or the supplies I typically use have been impacted by that. And so my that would might be the fact. My story might be there's no way I can teach under these conditions, right? Like we can have this really instinctive, and
Mm-hmm.
the thing that's important to understand about a story, it's not always necessarily incorrect. Like we don't want to assume that it's a false story, right? It's not about the story is true or the story is false as much as it is the story effective or ineffective, right? Is this a story that is aligned with my
Right.
values that's making me a more effective individual or that's helping me accomplish the things that I want to in my life? And so if my story is, oh, I cannot teach under these
Right.
conditions, then that's going to compromise like the emotion that's going to come from that is like maybe despair or like frustration or disappointment, and that affects behavior. And so I show up to my students who have no idea and have no association with this idea that, oh my gosh, we're getting budget cuts. They don't care. They're just students, right? They're just kids. And so, but my ability to teach, my behavior might be compromised. I might be short with the kids. I might be less capable of collaborating with other faculty because I'm just like in this wallowing in despair. And that affects, in some respect, that might
Mm-hmm.
actually is more like a self-fulfilling prophecy where the effects of that is I am a less effective teacher. I'm blaming it on the fact that we got budget cuts, which is a contributor for sure, but my story is the thing that I have control over. I can't change the budget cuts, but I can change my story. And that so that effect is self-fulfilling. And then the long-term legacy might be that I am a less effective teacher because of that, versus having a different story and a
Right.
different response, which we're going to talk about in a minute here, is the shift from the default paradigm, which is this less effective, to a deliberate paradigm, which is me being intentional about, okay, how can I respond to this in a way that's both true and believable and is something that I can follow through on. So that's just another example of maybe the paradigm fulfilling itself or walking through that. And the more aware we can be of kind of these stories and how it affects the emotions and the behavior and the legacy, the more effective this tool will be for us.
Yeah, I love that. You did point out again that really what's guiding our behaviors and what we want to be guiding our behaviors is, how do we want to be? I ask my clients that all the time. Okay, and then you ask yourself in that space, who do I want to be right now? And when we have a goal of who we want to be, and that can also help us shape our story. It can help us say, okay, well, yes, there are budget cuts, but I can still teach, using your example, I can still be a great teacher regardless of the supplies that I have. Of course, the supplies can help me, but I can still teach well. That doesn't change who I am. That doesn't change my passion for my work. That doesn't change how effective I can be in my teaching ability, because that's who I am and that's who I want to be. Okay, so let's dive into just a little bit about how do we shift our paradigm, and really it's just in our story, right?
Yeah.
And this is the part that we have an influence over. How can we bridge our story, our current story or our default story, to our intentional story? And often we don't get to choose what facts happen or the circumstances, but we always get to choose a story that we tell about it. And that's the choice that has that emotional ripple effect. And it's the emotions that really can guide our behaviors, not always. I mean, our emotions are data, they don't always have to be taken as directives, but that takes a large part of our prefrontal cortex to be working and to be intentional about what we do.
So, Mona, one example that I've heard that I think is kind of relevant to what we're talking about here regarding story and facts is this analogy of using a set of Lego bricks. So, if two people were given the same exact set of Lego bricks, and one person used it to build a castle and then the other person used it to build a prison, then you kind of have an idea of what we're talking about here. Two people might experience the same stimulus, might have the same facts, might have the same circumstances, same words spoken, anything like you were comparing how you respond versus your husband. This is very common with two parents, right? Like two parents experience the same kind of behavior from their child, but don't always behave the same way. And a lot of that has to do with this idea that maybe we're giving it different meaning. And the story
Okay.
is giving us different emotional responses within our bodies. And that emotion gives us a different set of behaviors. And then we have a different result. So there is some total control over that story. And then the trick just becomes, again, not trying to focus too much on right and wrong. Like, what's the right way to respond? What's the right story? Because that's not as helpful. But what's the effective story? What story is going to be more effective for me to help me show up in a way that I want to and experience the life in the way that I want to? And so there's kind of another analogy that might help understand what we're kind of talking about here.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And of course, I have to throw the nervous system in there.
Of
And
course.
that's the nervous system records our past experiences, right? And that's why often our behavior and our default paradigms or our thinking patterns or our behavior patterns feel so automatic, is because that's when the nervous system takes over. It just says, okay, this current event seems very similar to something that happened in the past. And when this happens and I feel this way, this is what I do. And that is based on, over and over and over again, things happened, and your brain and nervous system want to be efficient, and they don't want to take time. They don't want to sort things out. And this is a good thing, right? We don't want to have to study a map every time we're driving home from the grocery store. Our brain and body just learn the map, and that's how we do it every single time to be efficient. But that's sometimes where our nervous system isn't helping us. It triggers an automatic reaction that was rooted in the past and wants to treat the current situation very similar. So this is often when there's maybe criticism or rejection or conflict that has happened in the past, and we just get into a default thinking pattern and behavior pattern. But the good news is that we can change this through neuroplasticity. And what neuroplasticity is, again, if you don't know, I like to use this analogy about a path through a pasture or a forest. I grew up on a dairy farm, so this was very relatable to me. But every spring, we would bring our calves up to the pasture, and the pasture was wide and full of tall grass. And one day, one of the calves would walk through the grass and make a path to the water. And when that calf went down the path, it would just press down the grass just a little bit. Not much happened initially, but then another calf would follow. And soon there would be a faint line where those calves walked. Now, if you can imagine that same calf or a few others just keep walking that same path every day, every time they want water, before long, the grass is trampled down. Pretty soon, the dirt gets packed down. There's no grass at all. And it becomes a very clear, easy trail that the calves just follow it without thinking. And it's always easier to take this well-worn path than to create a new one through the grass. And this is exactly what happens in our brains. Every time we think a thought, whether it's helpful or not, you're like one of those calves walking through the grass. And the more you repeat that thought, the more your brain reinforces it, and it becomes a go-to path or the automatic thought that can create an automatic behavior. And over time, those can be repeated and it can become a belief, a behavior pattern, a thought pattern. And this is neuroplasticity, where your brain is physically changing based on what you repeat over and over again. And when we see a fact or we see something that happens that has happened before, our brain wants to choose the automatic response, the deepest rooted path, which is the easiest response. And so it is possible to reroute that, but it is harder. It does take energy, it does take time, but it is possible to rewire our brain and our nervous system to change our thoughts, to change our behaviors. It's hard, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a powerful concept to understand that although we have a choice, it's pretty common to feel like our responses are out of our control. They're automatic. It feels like we don't have a choice, although we do because of this automatic nervous system function where our brain's like, oh, I know what to do in this circumstance. Boom. And it may or may not serve us. That has nothing to do with whether or not the
Mhm.
brain is picking that response. It's more to do with efficiency and history than it is with effectiveness. So when we talk about doing the work, right? Has that person done the work? I always hear that phrase. And I used to think, what are they talking about? What's the work? This is part of that. This is part of the work that we do. It's this idea of pausing and using more energy because it's not as efficient. We have to consciously think differently and be very intentional. And it's hard. It's hard work to intentionally think differently,
Yeah.
but it's also the same, like you were talking about the calves, right? Do we go down this worn path that's like clearly visible and easy to use? Or do we go through the rough and create a new path and all the work that would be associated with that? So it's the same kind of thing in our brain. It takes more effort to create a new path than it does to use an old path. And we have to be really intentional because our brain doesn't want to do that on purpose. We have to think, we have to override and do that on
Yeah.
purpose. And another
Yeah.
example of this, again, in teaching, could be maybe a teacher who's grown up and being told by his or her parents that like you're not good enough, or just referencing like performance is the measure of your value. So when you won the soccer game, then you got praised, and when you didn't, then you either were neglected or even scolded. And we kind of grew up maybe in this performance-based environment where our worth was equated to how well we performed in school ourselves, or how well we did on the soccer field, or how good we did on our chores. And so if you grow up in that environment and then you're a teacher in the classroom, you might
Yeah.
have this very strong tendency to think, well, if my students aren't performing perfectly, then I'm a bad teacher. My value is lessened, or my ability to teach is directly proportional to the outcomes of my students. Now, that's not to say that there's no value in that at all, but there's a difference between saying my ability to be a good teacher is directly related to an outcome that is completely out of my control because this punk kid in my class won't listen to me and mouse off to me all the time. Like that's different than saying I want to be my very best teacher, and that results in my students performing at their best. So we can have different stories, but the story is you can adopt a story that says, I'm a great teacher, even if my students are disrespectful, even if I have parents that yell at me, even if my administrators are more focused on my test scores than they are on my in a relationship with my students. Those are all things that are out of your control. And really, we can have a story that says, I could still be a great teacher, even though. And that's maybe one other example that you can use on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, and in healthcare, it's the same. Um, a lot of healthcare workers really find, it's our passion to take care of other people and to help them in their time of need. But sometimes we get blamed for not doing our best, and a lot of times that stimulates those same maybe thoughts in the past of how we were treated as children or in middle school, or you did that wrong, you need to change or do it differently. And the interesting thing is I don't want people to think that your parents were bad people or they raised you wrong or that your coaches weren't helpful, but your nervous system and your brain remembers all of that, all of those experiences. My mentor, Dr. Gentry, talks about past painful learning, and all of that past painful learning adds up over time. It's like one drop of sand in the bucket, and all of that can be brought up with a similar situation. And so what we want to do is just realize that that's what's happening in that moment, and that our brain and our nervous system are trying to keep us safe in this similar situation. And this is what's so freeing about this is we can overcome those. We can create new patterns. We can go down new trails. And anytime we slow down, anytime we say, okay, this is something I'm doing on default, and I'm going to purposefully react a different way. I'm going to purposefully choose something more intentional, more aligned with my core values. Remind my nervous system, hey, we're safe. There's no danger here. And we don't have to run this old program. Over time, we do become different. We do become a different person. And, Micah, we have talked about this, that both you and I have seen huge changes in ourselves over the last 3 years. And we've seen so many changes in our clients using this paradigm. Let's talk just a little bit more about how to make the shift.
We've talked a lot about it kind of conceptually, but there's some specific steps that we can go into. We've talked in the past podcasts about identifying the kinds of ways that we can be the watcher. We can have these mindful releases. Like, how do we deal with these really powerful emotions? Now we're going to talk about the nuts and bolts of like, how do we make this shift? Once we've figured out that we have a default paradigm that's not serving us or not effective, what do we do? And how do we shift this into a more effective paradigm? So let's talk about those specific steps. And I think I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the first few steps that we can go through on that.
Sure. Yeah. So, our first podcast in the series, we talked about the mindful release. And if you haven't listened to that one, I would encourage that. But this is where you just get the situation out of your head. You just write down what happened, what people said, your thoughts about it. You can also say it out loud, dump it on paper. You can record it into your phone. And what this does is really just helps our brain slow down, kind of regurgitate the situation and get it out so that we can really see what's going on. And we do encourage you to actually take a few minutes to write this out and get it out on paper. And the more you practice this, I have realized that you don't always need to take the 2 minutes, the 5 minutes to write it out, although that does help. But in the moment, you can just think, okay, this is what happened. This is what he said or she said, and this is how I reacted, and this is what I'm thinking. That's not an effective way to handle this situation. And to start out, I will admit it's often, okay, that didn't go well. What do I want to change? And gradually we move things from that happened in the past to what do I want to happen right now in the present. So work on the mindful release, practice writing out your thoughts, saying out your thoughts, and practice slowing down your brain to prevent your nervous system from hijacking you. And sometimes you need to start with an emotional reboot. And we also have a podcast episode on that. I do this when I feel really emotional and I can't really conversate at that moment, or I feel like my nervous system is really hijacking me and I'm going to behave in a way that I don't want to. It really does help me to maybe step out and say, hey, I'll be back. Just give me 30 seconds. Or I need to go for a walk really quick and I can process my emotions. So name it to tame it. What emotion am I feeling? Where am I feeling it in my body? What color is it? Is it moving fast? Is it moving slow? Sometimes I can do this in the moment where someone's talking to me. I'm like, wow, this is really, really making me emotional. Where is that emotion going? And trying to relax that part of my body that's feeling that emotion. Taking deep breaths, using diaphragmatic breathing. naming it, labeling it, really feeling it and processing it in my body can help. So, again, we have podcasts on both of those, but really it's to help identify what's going on and what are my emotions about it. And this is what helps us identify our default to say, what story did my brain automatically tell about this fact? What did I automatically do? And remember that it's quick. It doesn't always produce the actions that we want. And so this is where we can start to change. And this is where sometimes the order of the feasible paradigm can change. And I like to say, who do I want to be right now? And Micah, do you want to just finish with how we shift it using our
Yeah.
legacy?
So once we've identified our default paradigm, the default story, right? The thing that is just happening by instinct or by repetition or efficiency from our brain, and assuming that that is an undesirable default paradigm, then we can jump ahead. This again, drawing off of some of the other material that's been out there forever and ever. Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. One of those habits is start with the end in mind. So we want to evaluate our legacy. The legacy is the
Mm-hmm.
long-term result of our behavior and the things that we do. And so if we look at this, we evaluate the legacy and we think, this is what I want. I keep using teacher analogies because that's what I'm familiar with. Maybe the teacher has this vision of like, this is the kind of teacher I want to be, or this is the kind of parent I want to be, or this is the kind of member of the community I want to be, whatever it is. You evaluate that legacy and keep thinking and looking for ways to kind of align your values with that long-term legacy. And then from there, you can step back into the present and say, all right, what's a paradigm that I could deliberately choose that will allow me to fulfill that legacy. And sometimes it's hard to know, right? It could be a little fuzzy, but it's an exercise to help get us closer to it. And so we want to choose a new story that's different than the one we just identified as our default. So the default one is not serving us, it's not effective, it's not what we want,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't produce desirable outcomes. So let's choose a new one. And it's a caution that I can give here. We need to choose a story that's believable. It needs to be something that we think is true and believable today, right now, and it might not be a story that gets us all the way to the desired legacy, right? So let's just use some really outlandish examples as a way of demonstrating this. If I said today, I want to be a millionaire, right? That's my long-term legacy, right? I want to be, incredibly independently wealthy, and I have this really great aspirational desire to be that way. Well, the story maybe I have today, my default is I'm broke, I'll always be broke, nobody values my service. Okay, so maybe that's my ineffective. And maybe I believe that. And I'm like, that's not contributing to my overall goal of becoming independently wealthy. So if my next story is I'm a brilliant businessman that everything I touch will be successful from now on, like we can tell ourselves that all day long, but my brain is saying, that is not
Yeah.
true. And I reject that because that's too far away from current reality. So, this also introduced another idea called the staircase that we're not going
Yeah.
to go into in too much detail right now, but you can do incremental thought adjustments to get yourself closer to and eventually to the point where maybe I do think that. Maybe I do at some point down the road think I'm an incredible businessman and everything I touch is successful. But today, the thing that I would believe is something that's a little bit closer to that, and that's, something like um, I try hard and I'm a hard worker. Like that's something I can believe about myself. I work hard,
Yeah.
even if not everything I touch is successful. I know I can be a hard worker. So instead of adopting the story of like I'm a failure of some kind, I could change my story to I'm a hard worker. And that gets me closer to it. So that's my new story. And that's the thing that I'm now deliberately trying to use. And the emotions that I feel from saying I work hard are different than the emotions I feel from the story of like I will never be good at this or everything I try fails. And so because that emotion is different, my behavior is different, and the legacy then I get closer to. And then once I really sink into this idea that I'm a hard worker, maybe the next thought is I'm a hard worker and I'm great at making connections with other people that are successful. And so now I'm putting myself in a mindset of now I'm surrounding myself with other people that work hard and are successful, even though maybe I'm not. So maybe I can't get all the way there, but I'm getting closer. So you can kind of see this incremental. But that's the choosing the deliberate paradigm is changing my story so that it is closer to what I want than I
Hmm.
currently am. And then we practice it because just because you thought of it today doesn't mean tomorrow it's going to stick, right? Like it, you might need to continue to practice thinking this intentional way. And again, this is the work that we're trying to do. It's hard. It takes time and effort and practice to create that new pathway. But once we've done that, then now we can say, okay, now what's the next pathway I can create that would be even closer to what I want ultimately? And this process of
Yeah.
evolutionary storytelling to yourself of meaning that's both believable but better, closer to your ultimate paradigm, is kind of the rest of the steps to helping us rewire the way that we think about things that are really hard in our life. Mona, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, Micah, I love that. Thank you for bringing up the staircase. I'm so glad you did because I was just working with a new client last week. And at the beginning of our session, I was talking about her goals and what she wanted to reach and what success would look like to her in certain areas of her life. And she told me, and they were great. And then she immediately followed it up with, but none of this could actually happen because it hasn't happened and I've tried and etc. And I told her, well, not yet, but it could. I mean, you're discounting things already. And it's amazing what a month can do when you practice new thoughts, what 3 months can do when you practice new thoughts. And, what can your life look like when you make these tiny, tiny changes? And in a year, you could have a totally different life. And we broke down her goals. And it is important to find a thought to practice that your brain believes. And so, um, and just like you said, it is important to find thought that your brain believes. And so we worked through several. And I said, is it believable to your brain? And I would tell her the thought, and she said no. And so we worked on it, we tweaked it because semantics do really matter. And finally we came up with a thought that she's like, yeah, I could believe that. And when I'm starting at the very, very beginning of the bottom of the staircase, I like to use the words capable. It's possible. There's potential that in the future someday I might be. And we just continue to break it up into smaller, believable thoughts. And this just leads our brain up that staircase to help us believe and become the person that we want to be. And we practice that over and over and over again and create those new neural pathways in our brain.
Yeah, I love that. It's a powerful concept to understand.
Now, let's just move on. I wanted to give a few examples of some default paradigms versus a deliberate paradigm using the same fact. And I wanted to specifically work with our population of healthcare workers, teachers, and parents. And because I was a nurse, I thought of this one and say that you're working in your 12-hour shift. It's super busy, you're understaffed. And a family member comes to the nurse's station and just says, we've been waiting forever. We haven't seen our nurse in a long time. No one's helping us. And you get that message and you go into the room and they are rolling their eyes and sighing and then say, we've been waiting for so long. And your default story could be, okay, they're upset with me. They think I'm a bad nurse. They're not happy with their care. They're not happy with the hospital. And that could drive your emotion to be defensive or ashamed or feel bad about yourself. And you could either, avoid them for the rest of the shift, maybe even snap back, maybe not be respectful. And the effect could escalate the frustration of both you and the family. It could create less trust from the family. And really, the legacy is that you, as a nurse, feel underappreciated and you don't like interacting with family members. And it's just easier to avoid them at all costs. Maybe you're going to start working the night shift because there's less family. versus a deliberate paradigm. So, same fact. Family came to the nurse's station and complained, "We've been waiting forever. We haven't seen our nurse. No one's here to help us." And you could think, okay, I understand that. We are really busy. I also understand that they're scared and stressed and frustrated. And this isn't about me, but it's just about being in the hospital because it's really stressful to be here. And of course, it's stressful to see your family member be in pain or have to wait for someone or something to get done. So that could create an emotion of compassion. And what you could do is take deep breaths. You could validate their concerns. You could go in there immediately and calmly and professionally explain what's going on, why it's taking longer, and what the rest of the day looks like. Give them a lot of information so that they feel more at ease. And that effect is for the family that they could feel more heard and reassured, and the patient also. And the effect for you is that you showed up the way that you wanted to as a nurse. And that legacy is that you build trust with those around you, you build trust with yourself, you're showing up the way that you want to, and there's a partnership that is built between you as a nurse and other family members and staff. And the legacy of that is just showing up as being supportive, being able to communicate. I'm looking to collaborate, I'm looking to problem solve. And it's just super interesting to me, when we get into like the nitty-gritty of this, that you can see how your brain spirals in one direction or the next just on a simple look or a sigh or a word or a phrase, and how the meanings can just be completely different.
And Mona, talking about like our automatic nature of this, it's interesting when you start really trying to watch for your emotions and your behaviors, how often you realize that these instinctive default responses are sometimes completely unconscious. Like you hear this sigh or you see an eyeball roll, and maybe you're not even consciously aware that that has any trigger on you, but you automatically go into this defensive stance
Mm.
and you find yourself getting snappy at people and you're like, what in the world is once you have this idea of I can be my own watcher, I can see myself for who I am, and then you start thinking, what triggered this? Like what caused me to start acting this way? And then you can trace it back to,
Yes.
oh, but it's not easy and it's not obvious. Sometimes we have these things that happen just out of instinct. Using my own example with teaching, let's just say that the students aren't paying attention, right? You're teaching, you've got your great lesson plan, maybe you have really high aspirations for this lesson plan, and you just notice that your kids aren't really paying attention. They're talking, they're kind of blowing you off, maybe somebody's asleep, and you can automatically talk to yourself into, your default story could be that I'm just a bad teacher. Like even my best efforts aren't good enough. I can't reach them. There's nothing I can do. The emotions that you might feel would be shame or frustration or disappointment. And then you might withdraw. Like you might say, okay, I tried this new thing, obviously didn't work. And my students are disengaged, and I'm never going to try a new thing again. Like that's the behavior, right? The result is like you withdraw and you say, forget it. I'm not going to try very hard anymore. And the legacy would be what? Well, of course, you'd be a less effective teacher. Like you would continue to just see more of the same results of this disengaged, ineffective teaching because you are withdrawing your own efforts. Versus the deliberate paradigm might be something like your story shifts from being like, I'm a terrible teacher, I can't do this, it doesn't pay off to try new things, to being something of like, okay, well, maybe my students are tired. Or maybe this particular method didn't work and I need to try a different method. But your emotion could then be more about curiosity and behavior and curiosity than about your own worth or your own ability. So you could chalk it up for this method didn't work.
Mhm.
Okay, fine. That's not a commentary on me as a teacher. That's just a commentary on this particular method. And your behavior could be, okay, I'll try a new strategy tomorrow. And so maybe tomorrow you hit it out of the park and you find something that's really great because you continue to work on that. That effort can come in large part because of the story that you tell
Yeah.
yourself. And the growth that comes from that is that you are more resilient as a teacher instead of more shut down. And all of those things are really easy to kind of talk about on paper, but the work really does. I mean, that's why we call it work, right? It is really hard in the face of negative feedback of any kind, whether it's your fault or not, to continue to tell yourself things that are both true and take effort, right? Like it takes more effort to try new methods than it does just to shut
Hmm.
down and say, forget it, I'm not going to try anymore. That's the easiest way to kind of respond, but it's also the least effective thing that, and doesn't align with who you want to be as a great teacher or who you want to be as a parent or in medicine or whatever field you're in. So it does take work and it can be challenging and difficult, but it is also incredibly rewarding. And that's where, if anyone out there thinks that, hey, I'm going to achieve all of these great values that I have in my life and all these aspirations, and it's going to be really easy, well, then that's a different discussion we probably need to have because that's typically not how anything in life works, where the most grand accomplishments are done with very little effort, right? So the effort is definitely there, but the idea that it's
Yeah.
possible through effective thinking strategies is super important. Otherwise, you can hit a brick wall and feel like there's no way around this, but it's not because there's no way around it. It's because we're trapped in bad thinking strategies that are disallowing us from moving past this obstacle. So there are ways around it. We just need to understand what those methods can be.
Yeah. Awesome. And we have talked about parenting a little bit already and given examples through this, but I just wanted to give one more. Just the other day, I walk in the kitchen and shocker, there's dishes all over the counter in the sink. And I think, okay, this child is supposed to have done their dishes and they didn't. So the fact would be, okay, there are dishes that are in the sink on the counter. That's it. My story, however, could be my kids never listen. They don't care if the house is clean, which is actually probably true. I'm the only one who cares that the house is clean, that the dishes are put in the dishwasher. I could spiral into thinking I'm failing as a parent. My kids are lazy. They aren't helping. They're not pitching in. And whether that's true or not, with the emotion that creates in myself is resentment. It creates, feeling unfair, unjust. My all or nothing thinking steps in, and then I get angry and I feel unappreciated and, et cetera, et cetera. And then I say, hey, come do your dishes. And there's family conflict and more arguing and more power struggle. And again, in lots of parenting things, distance is created in the relationship. So I don't want that. And this actually is what I'm working on. School just started. Everyone's starting new sports and we're getting used to a new schedule. And so when I look at the dishes, I think, okay, everyone's busy right now. Dishes actually aren't harmful. They haven't been there for weeks and days. There's no health hazard at this point. There's no mold
Not
growing in
yet.
them, and not yet. Yes. And maybe I need to step in because I want a clean house. Maybe I say, okay, so now from now on at 9 p.m. when everyone's home, we're just going to take a pause from our homework, from whatever we're doing in the night, and we're all going to clean the kitchen for 15 minutes. There's lots of things that I can think about when I'm in an emotional regulated state. I can feel more calm. I can feel more determined. I can really put my critical thinking and my problem solving skills to work. And I can have a calm discussion and say, I see that you're busy. I know that you've been running across country and now you have this to do and this to do and you have a lot of homework. Yet I still need your help in the kitchen. Or I can say, I see that you're feeling really behind and I'm just going to do it today. But tomorrow, do you think you can do it? There's lots of things that can create a stronger relationship. We can create more consistency, create a new schedule. And the legacy of that is that I want to create a home where we support each other when we are getting behind. We have responsibilities that we all need to share. We respect each other. And also, maybe you could say, hey, mom, I don't have time to do dishes. I know that that's my responsibility this week, but can you please do them today for me? It just helps my children feel safe, that they're like, oh, I can't tell mom about the dishes. She's going to have a freak out. And we can just as a family respond more
Yeah.
respectful with each other and just create a legacy and an environment where we want. So,
That's that's really great. I appreciate you sharing that with us, right? Like that feels so real, that exact scenario. I think every parent who's ever lived has experienced that to some degree. And it's a super relatable example of how you can use the paradigm in an effective way. So just to kind of wrap things up, I think we're getting to the end here, but just to kind of close up, let's
yeah.
just a challenge to all of our listeners out there. Pick a small situation. It's okay to start with something small as you're practicing and kind of getting acquainted with the paradigm. Do something that feels very manageable. Don't like create, don't look at the biggest problem in your life and try to fix it all right now. You might want to practice with something a little bit smaller, but write down the facts and then look at and try to discover and dig deep. Maybe go a few layers in. It's easy to get a surface level story that maybe is the most obvious, but not always the most relevant. But sometimes the story itself is a little bit disguised,
Mhm.
particularly if it's something that's on a default and an instinctive response. We might need to spend some time thinking about this and kind of digging into our own thinking and our own ideas to get to the actual real story. And that's one thing that we do as coaches. Often I find myself spending a lot of time with clients digging in to try to discover the actual story. People say, "Oh, this is a story," that I'm telling myself. I'm like, "All right, well, why are you telling yourself that story?" And then as we dig and kind of peel back the layers, then when you get to the actual story, it oftentimes is incredibly like revealing and can be very emotional, and you realize this is all rooted in a feeling of inadequacy or a feeling of like fear, or so it's often rooted
Yeah.
in some primal emotion or experience that you had that's really critical to kind of the development of your whole vision of how you see the world. But you can start with something small, like I said. Find the fact, write down the facts, find your story, and then follow it through. What is that story? How does it make me feel? When I feel that way, how do I behave? When I behave that way, what's the effect of the people around me or myself? And then what's the long term? If I continue to act that way, what would that mean long term? And then you just rewrite that. Let's be deliberate about a story. Let's talk about a believable story that's at least one step closer to the ideal that we want, to that story, and then start practicing telling yourself that story or reminding yourself frequently that that's your story, and to kind of replace your default. And that deliberate story can start generating a new set of emotions, different behaviors, different results, and ultimately get you closer to your long-term legacy.
Awesome. Yes. And thank you for that. I did want to add that Micah and I both offer a free 30-minute consultation, and we would be happy to help you analyze this and walk you through it and help you create a new story. Sometimes that's also hard as I want to think differently about this. I just don't know how. And it often helps an outside perspective to help you make that shift. So, in the show notes, we have both of our websites that you can reach out to either one of us. And yeah, just practice this. I'd love to hear how it goes. So, thank you for listening. Hey there, you've reached the end. Thank you so much for spending your time with Micah and I today. I wanted to let you know that I'm opening up my group program this fall. It starts September 16th and ends before Christmas. I would love to have you join me so you can learn more about your brain and your nervous system, their natural tendencies, how they are wired, and how to rewire them for less stress, more intentional living in a small group atmosphere. Check out my website for details, and I'd love to see you there. I also offer teaching this material in groups, specifically healthcare workers and any profession that feels like they are stressed out and need some tools for instant relief. So check my website for those details. See you there.